A 16-year-old girl walks through a dark alleyway on a cold January evening, just 4 days after celebrating her birthday. 30 minutes later, she collapses on the pavement, her life slipping away before help can arrive. For 21 years, her killer walks free, hiding in plain sight within the same community that mourns her. What finally brings him to justice changes the way prosecutors use evidence forever. Clare Tiltman enters the world on January 14, 1977, in Greenhithe, a quiet residential town in Kent, England, where the River Thames curves through the landscape. Her parents, Cliff and Linda Tiltman, pour their hearts into raising their only child in their home on Woodward Terrace in nearby Stone. Claire grows into a bright, vivacious teenager with an infectious laugh and a warmth that draws people to her naturally. Her friends at Dartford Grammar School for Girls describe her as fiercely loyal, wickedly funny, and endlessly kind, the type of person who remembers everyone's birthday and always has time to listen. At 16, Claire isn't following the typical teenage dream of fame or fortune. She harbors a different aspiration entirely. She spends her free time at Dartford Fire Station, working toward her Bronze Duke of Edinburgh award and learning from the firefighters who quickly come to adore her determination and spirit. She tells everyone who will listen that she wants to be a firefighter herself one day, to help people, to make a difference. On January 18, 1993, a Monday evening, Claire finishes her day at school and heads home. The winter sun sets early, casting long shadows across the streets of Greenhithe by 6 o'clock. Claire leaves her home on Woodward Terrace around 6 p.m, bundled against the January cold in her zipped-up jacket. She plans to walk the familiar route to her friend's house on Riverview Road in Greenhithe, less than a mile away. The journey takes her along the A226 London Road, a busy main road even at this hour as commuters make their way home from work. Before heading to her friend's place, Claire decides to make a quick detour. Claire crosses a zebra crossing near the Ivy Bower surgery, her footsteps echoing on the pavement. Just off the main road sits a small alleyway, a shortcut that locals use regularly. The alley connects London Road to the residential streets beyond, saving precious minutes for anyone who knows the area well. Around 6:20 p.m, Claire enters this narrow passageway. The alleyway stretches only about 100 steps from the busy main road, a dark corridor between buildings where the streetlights barely penetrate. On any other evening, Claire would emerge on the other side within seconds, continuing on to meet her friend. But tonight, someone waits in the shadows. The attack happens with shocking speed and brutal violence. Claire fights back as best she can, managing to break free from her attacker. She staggers toward London Road, desperate to reach help, to reach the light, to reach safety. 9 stab wounds pierce her body, her chest, her back, her neck. The pathologist will later determine she was attacked from behind, her jacket still zipped up against the cold when the first blow strikes. A passerby spots Claire as she collapses on the pavement near the mouth of the alleyway. The witness immediately raises the alarm, their shouts cutting through the evening air. A nurse who happens to be nearby rushes to Claire's side and begins attempting resuscitation. Others gather, some calling for emergency services, some standing helpless as they watch a teenage girl fight for her life on a Monday evening in their quiet town. Before we continue with what happened that night, hit that subscribe button if you want to see justice served in cases like this. And let me know in the comments, where are you watching from? Emergency services arrive within minutes, but the damage proves too severe. Clare Tiltman dies at the scene, her blood staining the pavement where she fell. She never makes it to her friend's house. She never gets to pursue her dream of becoming a firefighter. 4 days after her 16th birthday, Claire's life ends in a senseless act of violence that appears to have no motive whatsoever. Police officers secure the scene immediately, cordoning off the alleyway and the surrounding area. The location presents both advantages and challenges for investigators. This attack occurs between 6 and 6:30 p.m. during the evening commute when dozens of cars travel along London Road. Someone must have seen something. Someone must have noticed a person fleeing the scene. acting suspiciously, covered in blood perhaps. The crime scene itself offers little comfort to the investigators who arrive. No murder weapon lies abandoned in the alley. No obvious physical evidence points to the killer's identity. The attack appears random, motiveless, carried out with extreme violence against a girl who, by all accounts, has no enemies. Claire wasn't robbed. Her belongings remain undisturbed. No sexual assault occurred. The killing seems to serve no purpose beyond the act itself. As word spreads through Greenhithe and the neighbouring town of Stone, shock ripples through the community. Parents pull their children closer. Residents lock their doors earlier than usual. A predator walks among them. Someone capable of killing a teenage girl in a public place at an hour when people still travel the streets. Cliff and Linda Tiltman receive news that shatters their world completely. Their only child, their beloved daughter, murdered just minutes from home while walking to see a friend. The police officers who deliver this news struggle to find adequate words. There are no adequate words for this kind of loss. Within hours, local residents begin leaving floral tributes at the scene. Hundreds of bouquets pile up near the alleyway, transforming the site of horror into a makeshift memorial. Cards attached to the flowers express disbelief, grief, and demands for justice. Claire's photograph appears on the front pages of local newspapers the next morning, her bright smile a stark contrast to the headline announcing her death. What investigators find in the coming days would launch one of the largest murder inquiries in Kent police history and send them searching for a killer who proves more elusive than anyone imagines. Kent police launches Operation Artist, mobilizing an extensive team of detectives and officers to hunt Clare Tiltman's killer. The investigation becomes one of the largest in the force's history, consuming thousands of hours and every available resource. Detective teams set up a command center, coordinating what quickly becomes a massive operation involving house-to-house inquiries throughout Greenhithe and the surrounding areas. Officers fan out across the neighborhood, knocking on every door within a half-mile radius of the crime scene. They ask the same questions repeatedly. Did you see anything unusual Monday evening? Did you notice anyone running, acting strangely, appearing out of breath or disheveled? Were you driving along London Road between 6 and 6:30? The responses flood in, each statement carefully documented, each potential lead meticulously followed. Over the next several weeks, investigators collect more than 1,500 witness statements. The database grows to include details on approximately 20,000 individuals. Officers review around 40,000 documents, building a paper trail that fills multiple filing cabinets. The sheer volume of information presents its own challenge, sorting genuine leads from dead ends, identifying patterns in the noise, finding the needle in an ever-growing haystack. Forensic teams focus their attention on the alleyway where Claire takes her final steps. They collect blood samples from the scene, documenting every drop, every smear, every trace of evidence. They search for the murder weapon, a knife that the pathologist determines inflicted the 9 fatal wounds. Despite extensive searches of the alley, the surrounding area, nearby bins and drainage systems, the weapon never surfaces. The killer either takes it with him or disposes of it so effectively that it remains hidden. The pathologist's report provides crucial details about the attack itself. Claire suffers 9 stab wounds, inflicted with enough force to penetrate deep into her body. The wounds to her chest, back, and neck indicate a frenzied assault, someone striking repeatedly with deadly intent. The attack comes from behind. Claire's jacket remains zipped when the first blow lands, suggesting she never sees her attacker approaching. The cause of death: multiple stab wounds leading to catastrophic blood loss. The timeline establishes that Claire dies between 6 and 6:30 p.m., a window that should work in investigators' favor. This represents prime commuting time, when the streets fill with people heading home from work, when cars line London Road in a steady stream. Yet despite the timing, despite the location, just steps from a major road, no witnesses come forward with definitive information about the attacker. Police issue public appeals through every available channel. Claire's face appears on television news broadcasts across the region. Newspapers devote front-page coverage to the case. Officers offer a $1,000 reward for information leading to the killer's identification. The community responds with tips, theories, and possible sightings, but nothing concrete emerges. Detectives begin building profiles of potential suspects. They look for individuals with a history of violence against women. They investigate anyone known to frequent the area around London Road. They examine whether Claire knew her attacker, whether this represents a targeted killing or a random act of violence. Every angle receives scrutiny, every possibility explored. The investigation reveals that Claire leads a normal teenage life, free from the complications that sometimes provide motives for murder. She isn't involved in drugs. She has no secret boyfriend who might inspire jealous rage. She hasn't witnessed a crime or received threats. Her circle of friends speaks uniformly of her kindness and popularity. Teachers at Dartford Grammar School describe a bright student with ambitions and potential. The firefighters at Dartford Fire Station remember a dedicated young woman determined to join their ranks. This lack of obvious motive frustrates investigators, even as it clarifies the nature of the crime. They're hunting someone who kills for the sake of killing, someone who targets a vulnerable victim simply because the opportunity presents itself. This realization makes the case both more urgent and more difficult. Without a clear motive connecting killer to victim, traditional investigative approaches prove less effective. Detectives conduct polygraph examinations on several individuals who enter their radar. They collect DNA samples from potential suspects, running them against evidence from the crime scene. They re-interview witnesses multiple times, hoping that memory might shake loose new details with time and reflection. They organize reconstructions of Claire's final movements, appealing for anyone who traveled that route to come forward. Months pass without a breakthrough. The investigation team maintains their dedication, refusing to let the case grow cold, but leads dry up with frustrating regularity. Every promising avenue eventually terminates in disappointment. Every suspect eventually receives clearance. The forensic evidence, while carefully preserved, fails to match anyone in existing databases. The community refuses to forget Claire. Vigils mark the anniversaries of her death. Her parents, Cliff and Linda, make repeated public appeals for information, their grief raw and undiminished by passing time. They believe someone in Greenhithe knows something, has seen something, holds a piece of the puzzle that could crack the case open. But the evidence tells a different story. The killer leaves minimal traces at the scene. No fingerprints identify him. The DNA evidence, while present, doesn't match anyone in police databases. The murder weapon remains missing. No witnesses provide a clear description of anyone fleeing the scene. The investigation, despite its size and scope, despite the dedication of dozens of officers, despite the community's desperate desire for answers, hits an insurmountable wall. By the end of 1993, Operation Artist begins to wind down, though it never officially closes. Detectives continue following up on occasional tips, but the daily intensity of the investigation cannot be sustained indefinitely. The case file remains open, waiting for the breakthrough that seems increasingly unlikely to arrive. And that's where the case hits a wall that would last for more than 2 decades, through years that would take both of Claire's parents to their graves without ever seeing justice for their daughter. 2 years pass, then 5, then 10. Clare Tiltman's murder file gathers dust in the cold case archives, never forgotten but seemingly unsolvable. The initial intensity of Operation Artist fades into periodic reviews and occasional follow-ups when new tips trickle in. But the fundamental problem remains unchanged. Investigators know what happened to Claire, but they cannot identify who made it happen. In 1995, something occurs that should have cracked the case wide open, though nobody recognizes it at the time. On October 17th, just 2 years after Claire's murder, a 21-year-old woman named Charlotte Barnard walks along London Road in Greenhithe, the same road where Claire met her death. A man approaches her and launches a vicious knife attack, stabbing Charlotte 14 times before leaving her for dead. Miraculously, Charlotte survives. Police arrest the attacker within hours. His name is Colin Ash Smith, a 46-year-old former milkman who lives in nearby Swanscombe. When officers search his white Ford Capri, they discover half of a school tie that links him to another crime: the 1988 rape, kidnap, and attempted murder of a 27-year-old woman in Swanscombe. That victim also survived being stabbed 5 times and strangled until she lost consciousness. Detectives immediately noticed the similarities between these attacks and Clare Tiltman's murder. All 3 crimes occur in the same general area. All involve young women targeted while alone. All feature frenzied knife attacks. All demonstrate extreme violence. Ash Smith becomes a person of interest in Clare's case, questioned multiple times about his whereabouts on January 18, 1993. Ash Smith denies any involvement in Clare's murder. His mother, Diane Ash Smith, a local councillor and former mayor, provides her son with an alibi. She claims Colin was driving her home after dropping off political leaflets at the time Clare died. Investigators find this suspicious, a mother protecting her son, but they cannot break the alibi, and they lack physical evidence connecting Ash Smith to Clare's murder scene. In December 1996, Ash Smith pleads guilty to the 1988 and 1995 attacks. Mr. Justice K sentences him to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 15 years. But despite the obvious similarities to Clare's case, despite the geographical proximity, despite the matching pattern of violence, prosecutors don't charge him with her murder. They simply don't have enough evidence to proceed. The case file reveals troubling details about Ash Smith's history. He keeps a diary documenting his violent fantasies and detailing attacks he commits or plans to commit. He collects knives obsessively. He harbors dark thoughts about women, viewing them as targets rather than human beings. Police find newspaper clippings about Clare's murder in his possession, including coverage from the first anniversary of her death, a macabre trophy kept for reasons only Ash Smith understands. But physical evidence remains elusive. DNA testing in the mid-1990s lacks the sophistication it will later achieve. The samples collected from Clare's crime scene don't conclusively match Ash Smith. Without a murder weapon, without witnesses, without a confession, prosecutors face an uphill battle they're not confident they can win. Years continue sliding past. Linda Tiltman, Clare's mother, dies from cancer in 2008, never learning who killed her daughter. The hospice care at Eleanor Lyons provides comfort in her final days, but no comfort can fill the void left by Clare's absence. Cliff Tiltman carries on alone, his grief compounded by the knowledge that his wife died without closure. In 2010, the Kent Police Cold Case Unit receives Home Office funding to re-examine the Tiltman evidence using modern forensic techniques. Detective teams pull the boxes from storage, spreading photographs and statements across their desks, looking at the case with fresh eyes and new technology. They retest DNA samples. They re-interview witnesses whose memories have had nearly 2 decades to settle and sometimes shift. They apply geographic profiling techniques that didn't exist in 1993. On January 18, 2012, the 19th anniversary of Clare's murder, Cliff Tiltman makes a public plea for information. He stands before cameras and reporters, his face lined with grief and determination, asking anyone with knowledge to come forward. He speaks directly to his daughter's killer. Someone knows what happened. Someone can end this family's suffering. Months later, Cliff Tiltman dies, joining his wife in death without ever seeing justice for Clare. Their only child's murder remains unsolved. The couple who raised a bright, ambitious daughter with dreams of helping others as a firefighter never witnessed the resolution they desperately sought. People like Colin Ash Smith count on silence to cover their evil. Show them your voice stands for justice. Type "Justice for Clare Tiltman" in the comments and hit that like button. But Clare's friends refuse to let her memory fade into obscurity. 6 of her former classmates from Dartford Grammar School form the Justice for Clare campaign, determined to keep public pressure on authorities and maintain Clare's case in the spotlight. Lisa Gribbin, Joanne Roberts, and Vicky Atkins lead the effort, organizing events, creating a dedicated website, and coordinating appeals for information. In January 2013, on the 20th anniversary of Claire's death, the campaign organizes a candlelit walk through Greenhithe. Dozens of participants retrace Claire's final steps from the Bull Pub on London Road to St Mary's Church. They carry candles and torches, their lights piercing the winter darkness, just as their determination pierces the despair that threatens to overwhelm the case. A memorial service follows, celebrating Claire's life while demanding answers about her death. The following year, marking the 21st anniversary, the campaign hosts a charity concert at Dartford's Princes Park Stadium. The event raises over $3,000 for the firefighters' charity and Eleanor Lyons Hospice, organisations connected to Claire's dreams and her mother's final care. The band plays, raffles run, and hundreds of people gather to prove that Claire hasn't been forgotten, that her case still matters, that someone out there must know something. Throughout these years, Ash Smith sits in prison for his other crimes, his possible involvement in Claire's murder, a spectre that investigators cannot quite grasp. He serves his sentence at various facilities, including periods of assessment at Broadmoor Secure Hospital and a specialist treatment facility at HMP Wotton. In 2013, he faces a parole board, potentially eligible for release after serving 19 years behind bars. But in September 2013, everything changes. Kent police detectives, conducting a renewed cold case review, obtain a warrant to search Ash Smith's former family home in Myrtle Place, Stone. Officers arrive early in the morning, surprising Ash Smith's father, Aubrey, who still lives at the property. The elderly man protests, sticking two fingers up at reporters who converge on the street. He insists his son is innocent, claims police are hounding the family, demands they leave them alone. The search proves productive. Police remove several bags of potential evidence from the property. More importantly, they begin scrutinizing Ash Smith's prison records with renewed intensity, looking for anything they might have missed, any statement he made, any confidence he shared with fellow inmates. And that's when they discover something that changes everything. A conversation that occurred more than a decade earlier in HMP Wakefield, a confession shared between cellmates, a detail so specific that only Claire's killer could possibly know it. But in 2013, a breakthrough would finally emerge from the most unexpected source, the words of a convicted criminal who shared a cell with a man who couldn't keep his darkest secret to himself. Between 2001 and 2003, Colin Ash Smith serves time at HMP Wakefield, a high-security prison in West Yorkshire that houses some of Britain's most dangerous criminals. During this period, he shares a cell with a fellow inmate named Stéphane Dubois. The two men bond over shared interests. They play Dungeons and Dragons together, pass time in conversation, develop the kind of casual friendship that sometimes forms in the confined world of prison life. One day, during one of these conversations, Ash Smith tells Dubois about an attack he committed but was never charged for. He describes seeing a schoolgirl crossing a zebra crossing. He says he snapped and followed her. He admits stabbing her repeatedly in a nearby alleyway. The detail about the zebra crossing proves crucial. It's specific, precise, and not widely known to the public. Dubois files this information away in his memory, perhaps not initially grasping its significance. Years pass. Both men eventually move to different facilities, their paths diverging within the prison system. But the conversation stays with Dubois, nagging at him, particularly as he learns more about unsolved cases in Kent. In 2013, when cold case investigators renew their focus on the Tiltman murder, Dubois comes forward with his statement. He contacts authorities and provides detailed information about what Ash Smith told him during their time at Wakefield. The detail about the zebra crossing immediately captures investigators' attention. They pull up the case files, examining Claire's final movements with this new information in mind. Clare Tiltman crosses a zebra crossing near the Ivy Bower surgery, just moments before entering the alleyway where she dies. This detail never receives widespread publicity. It appears in police reports, but not in newspaper coverage. Only someone intimately familiar with the case, or someone who was there, would know about that specific crossing. The confession alone might not provide enough evidence to charge Ash Smith with murder, especially since it comes from a fellow inmate whose credibility defense attorneys will certainly attack. But investigators now have something they lacked in 1993, a legal framework that could change everything. In 2003, Parliament passed the Criminal Justice Act, which includes provisions allowing bad character evidence to be presented at trial. Under previous law, prosecutors couldn't tell juries about a defendant's prior convictions, even when those convictions demonstrated a clear pattern of behavior. The new legislation removes this restriction in certain circumstances, particularly when prior acts show a defendant's propensity to commit specific types of crimes. Prosecutors examine Ash Smith's criminal history alongside the Tiltman murder. The similarities prove striking. In December 1988, Ash Smith abducts a 27-year-old woman at knife point and gunpoint, drives her to a quarry, attempts to rape her multiple times, strangles her until she loses consciousness, and stabs her 5 times in the back. She survives and provides descriptions that eventually help identify him. Before we get to the arrest that shocked everyone, share this video with someone who follows true crime. Stories like Clare Tiltman's need to be heard. Also, drop a comment. What's the weather like where you are? In October 1995, Ash Smith attacks Charlotte Barnard as she walks along London Road in Greenhithe. Motivated by rage over suspicions about his girlfriend's infidelity, he approaches Charlotte and stabs her 14 times, leaving her for dead. She also survives, leading directly to his arrest and the discovery of evidence linking him to the 1988 attack. All 3 attacks, 1988, 1993, and 1995, share unmistakable characteristics. Ash Smith targets lone women in the same geographical area. He uses knives, he strikes with frenzied violence, he attacks from behind or with the element of surprise. He demonstrates no remorse. The pattern couldn't be clearer. On the same day Ash Smith faces his parole board hearing in 2013, police charge him with Clare Tiltman's murder. The timing raises eyebrows. Critics suggest authorities are simply preventing his release rather than pursuing justice. But prosecutors insist the evidence justifies the charge, that the combination of Dubois' testimony, the bad character evidence law, and renewed forensic analysis provides sufficient grounds for prosecution. Colin Ash Smith enters this story not as a stranger to Clare's world, but as someone who moves through the same community. He knows the area intimately, having worked as a milkman in Greenhithe and the surrounding towns. He's familiar with the alleyways, the shortcuts, the quiet places where people pass through unobserved. More disturbingly, he knows Clare's family through the local Royal British Legion Club, though they're not close friends. In a detail that sends chills through investigators, they discover that Ash Smith attends Clare's funeral. He stands among the mourners, perhaps observing the grief he caused, perhaps relishing the pain, perhaps ensuring that suspicion doesn't fall upon him through his absence. He presents himself as a concerned community member, saddened by this tragedy, while potentially harboring the knowledge of exactly how Clare died. The day after Clare's murder, Ash Smith makes a calculated move. He contacts police to report that he was driving through Greenhithe on the evening of January 18, 1993. He claims he saw someone with curly hair using a pedestrian crossing close to where Clare was attacked. Investigators now recognize this as a preemptive alibi, a ploy to explain why someone might have seen him or his distinctive white Ford Capri in the area during the relevant time period. His mother's false alibi takes on new significance in retrospect. Diane Ash Smith, using her position as a counselor, regularly quizzes detectives about the Tiltman investigation. She asks specifically about a car matching Colin's seen in the area. She provides cover for her son, lying to protect him while Clare's parents suffer without answers. Years later, during a television interview, she admits telling her husband to dispose of a knife from their house when Colin was first questioned. Aubrey Ash Smith saws up the knife blade, boils it, and dumps it in a bush, a desperate attempt to destroy evidence. He receives a 6-month prison sentence in 1997 for perverting the course of justice. The pieces fall into place with horrifying clarity. Ash Smith isn't just a viable suspect. He's the killer who evaded justice for 2 decades through a combination of his mother's protection, the limitations of 1990s forensic technology, and the legal restrictions that prevented prosecutors from showing juries his pattern of violence. When detectives bring Colin Ash Smith in for questioning about Clare Tiltman's murder in 2013, they come armed with 20 years of additional evidence, new legal tools, and a confession that places him at the scene of a crime only the killer could describe accurately. Colin Ash Smith sits across from detectives in the interview room, a position he's occupied before for other crimes. At 46 years old, he's spent nearly 2 decades in prison for the 1988 and 1995 knife attacks. He knows how interrogations work. He understands his rights. He's prepared to maintain the same stance he's held since 1993. He had nothing to do with Clare Tiltman's murder. The detectives lay out their evidence methodically. They present the similarities between the 3 attacks, 1988, 1993, and 1995. They describe the geographic clustering, all occurring within a small radius in Kent. They detail the victim profile: lone women, vulnerable, attacked without warning. They emphasize the weapon of choice, knives, wielded with deadly force. They note the frenzied nature of each assault, the multiple stab wounds, the lack of sexual motivation in Clare's case, despite his attempts in the other attacks. Ash Smith listens, his face impassive. He's heard these theories before during the original investigation. Police suspected him then, questioned him multiple times, but couldn't make charges stick. He denies involvement, just as he denied it in 1993, just as he denied it in 1995, when first arrested for attacking Charlotte Barnard. Then detectives introduce Stéphane Dubois' testimony. They describe the conversation at HMP Wakefield, the casual confession between cellmates. They focus on the specific detail about the zebra crossing, information not widely publicized, a fact that only someone present at the scene would know. They point out that Clare Tiltman crossed a zebra crossing moments before entering the alleyway where she died. They ask Ash Smith how Dubois would know this detail unless Ash Smith himself provided it. Ash Smith's defense shifts. He questions Dubois' credibility, suggests that the inmate might be confused, points out that prison conversations occur years ago and memories fade. He hints that Dubois might have motivations to fabricate testimony, perhaps seeking favorable treatment, perhaps harboring personal grudges. Under cross-examination during the eventual trial, Dubois himself admits potential confusion due to medication and the passage of time, though he maintains the core truth of his testimony. Detectives press forward with evidence about Ash Smith's behavior in the days following Clare's murder. They confront him about his phone call to police, the one where he reported seeing someone with curly hair near the crime scene. They suggest this represents a calculated attempt to establish plausible deniability for his presence in the area. They point out that no such person with curly hair ever emerged as a suspect or witness. They raise questions about his attendance at Clare's funeral. Why would a casual acquaintance from the Royal British Legion Club feel compelled to attend? Why insert himself into the grieving process? They note that killers sometimes return to crime scenes or attend victims' funerals, drawn by a psychological need to witness the aftermath of their actions. The interview covers his mother's false alibi, the knife his father destroyed, the newspaper clippings found in his possession. Each piece of evidence builds upon the last, constructing a circumstantial case that grows stronger with every addition. Detectives present forensic reanalysis, conducted using modern techniques unavailable in 1993. They discuss DNA evidence, fiber analysis, and other scientific approaches that have evolved dramatically over 2 decades. Throughout the interrogation, Ash Smith maintains his denial. He doesn't confess to Clare's murder. He doesn't break down or show remorse. He sits calmly, responding to questions, rejecting accusations, insisting that he had nothing to do with the 16-year-old's death. His demeanor remains controlled, almost detached, even when confronted with the most damning evidence. But prosecutors don't need a confession. They have something potentially more powerful: the ability to show a jury Ash Smith's pattern of behavior through bad character evidence. They can demonstrate that this isn't a case of mistaken identity or coincidence. They can prove that Ash Smith committed virtually identical attacks before and after Claire's murder, establishing a clear modus operandi that points unmistakably toward his guilt. The interrogation reveals Ash Smith's psychology: a man comfortable with violence against women, someone who plans attacks while also claiming they result from snapping in moments of rage. His diary, entries seized during investigations into his other crimes, detail violent fantasies and document actual assaults. They reveal an obsession with knives, a fascination with Jack the Ripper, and a worldview that dehumanizes his victims. Detectives describe Ash Smith as a knife-obsessed loner, whose social isolation and dark preoccupations created conditions for repeated violence. He works various jobs: milkman, factory worker on a production line manufacturing industrial belts, that provide him access to communities while maintaining emotional distance from neighbors and colleagues. He lives with his parents well into adulthood, his mother's protective instincts extending to providing false alibis and disposing of evidence. When asked about motive, Ash Smith offers no satisfactory explanation for any of his attacks. The 1988 victim he kidnaps, assaults, and attempts to murder survives to testify about his rage and violence. Charlotte Barnard, attacked in 1995, becomes a substitute target for anger he feels toward his girlfriend. But Clare Tiltman, she represents nothing more than an opportunity, a vulnerable girl in the wrong place at the wrong time, crossing a killer's path on a January evening. The interrogation doesn't produce the dramatic confession that often appears in crime dramas. Ash Smith doesn't weep, doesn't apologize, doesn't explain why he killed Claire. Instead, he maintains the posture he's held for 20 years, denying responsibility while evidence accumulates around him like water rising in a locked room. With a confession on tape from his time at HMP Wakefield, even if delivered secondhand through Stéphane Dubois, and the bad character evidence showing his unmistakable pattern of violence, prosecutors moved quickly to ensure Colin Ash Smith would finally face justice for the murder of Clare Tiltman. On November 3, 2014, Colin Ash Smith's trial begins at Inner London Crown Court in Suffolk. Mr. Justice Sweeney presides over proceedings that will last 5 weeks and captivate public attention across Britain. 21 years after Clare Tiltman's murder, her killer finally sits in the dock, facing the charge of murder that many believed would never come. The prosecution team, led by Brian Altman QC, builds their case around 3 pillars: the bad character evidence showing Ash Smith's pattern of knife attacks on women, the prison confession to Stéphane Dubois, and the circumstantial evidence linking him to Claire's murder. Prosecutor Nigel Pilkington, from the CPS Complex Casework Unit, explains their strategy to the jury. This case represents one of the first major uses of bad character evidence under the 2003 Criminal Justice Act, a legal innovation that allows jurors to understand the full scope of Ash Smith's violent history. Altman presents the similarities between the 3 attacks in methodical detail. He describes the 1988 kidnapping, attempted rape, and attempted murder of the 27-year-old woman. He walks the jury through the 1995 attack on Charlotte Barnard, who survives 14 stab wounds. Then he positions Claire's murder between these 2 crimes, showing how all 3 share unmistakable characteristics: lone women targeted in the same geographical area, frenzied knife attacks, extreme violence, assaults that appear to stem from Ash Smith's warped pleasure in inflicting harm. The prosecution calls Stéphane Dubois to the witness stand. The fellow inmate describes his friendship with Ash Smith at HMP Wakefield, their shared interest in Dungeons and Dragons, the conversations that passed time during incarceration. Then he recounts the crucial confession, Ash Smith describing how he saw a girl on a zebra crossing, how he snapped, how he attacked her in a nearby alleyway. Under cross-examination, Defense attorneys attack Dubois' credibility mercilessly. They point out his criminal record. They highlight the years that passed between the alleged confession and his testimony. They suggest medication might cloud his memory. They propose that Dubois fabricated the story, seeking favorable treatment from authorities. Dubois admits potential confusion, but maintains the core truth. Ash Smith confessed to an uncharged attack near a zebra crossing, and Clare Tiltman represents the only victim matching that specific description. Charlotte Barnard takes the stand, her survival a miracle that now serves justice. She describes the terror of Ash Smith's attack, the 14 stab wounds, the certainty that she would die on London Road just as Claire died 2 years earlier. Her testimony provides the jury with a living witness to Ash Smith's capacity for violence, a woman who escaped the fate Claire couldn't. The 1988 victim also testifies, recounting the kidnapping, the attempted rape, the strangulation, the 5 stab wounds in her back. She describes the white Ford Capri where Ash Smith held her captive, the quarry where he took her, the absolute terror of facing death at his hands. Her survival, like Charlotte's, demonstrates that Ash Smith's pattern involves attempting murder when his other objectives fail or when rage consumes him. Forensic experts present evidence about the knife attacks, showing the similarities in wound patterns and attack methodology. While DNA technology cannot definitively place Ash Smith at Claire's murder scene, the samples collected in 1993 lack the quality needed for modern analysis. The totality of evidence paints a damning picture. The prosecution introduces Ash Smith's diary, seized during investigations into his other crimes. Entries detail violent fantasies, document attacks he committed, and reveal his obsession with knives and violence against women. They present the newspaper clippings about Claire's murder found in his possession, particularly coverage from the first anniversary, trophies kept by a killer who couldn't entirely distance himself from his crime. Evidence emerges about his mother's false alibi, her abuse of her position as a counselor to quiz detectives about the investigation, and her instruction to Aubrey Ash Smith to dispose of the knife. The prosecution argues this demonstrates consciousness of guilt, a family scrambling to protect a son they knew or suspected killed Clare Tiltman. Defense attorneys mount their case, arguing that the prosecution relies too heavily on circumstantial evidence and the questionable testimony of a convicted criminal. They challenge the bad character evidence, suggesting it prejudices the jury unfairly. They point out the lack of physical evidence directly connecting Ash Smith to Claire's murder scene. They emphasize that conviction requires proof beyond reasonable doubt, not simply a pattern of similar crimes. They argue that Stéphane Dubois' testimony lacks reliability, that years and medication and the inherent unreliability of prison conversations create too much uncertainty. They suggest that Ash Smith's attendance at Claire's funeral proves nothing. He knew the family through the British Legion Club, and attending represented normal community behaviour. They attempt to explain away each piece of circumstantial evidence, offering alternative interpretations that create space for doubt. But the prosecution's closing arguments synthesize 21 years of investigation, evidence, and analysis into a coherent narrative. Altman describes Ash Smith as a predator who selected vulnerable victims, who planned attacks while claiming they resulted from moments when he snapped, who demonstrated no remorse or capacity for rehabilitation. He points out that Ash Smith had multiple opportunities to confess, to show remorse, to acknowledge his crime, but chose silence and denial instead. Nigel Pilkington emphasizes the rarity of stranger murders in Britain. Approximately 100 murders occur annually, and almost all involve killers who know their victims. Stranger murders typically have motives: sexual assault, robbery, theft. Claire's murder lacks these elements, making it even more disturbing. The killer attacked purely for the act of violence itself, targeting a teenage girl whose only mistake was walking alone through a dark alleyway. The trial showcases the work of multiple law enforcement agencies and legal teams who refused to abandon Claire's case. Detective Superintendent Rob Vinson and the Kent Police Cold Case Unit receive recognition for their persistence. The Crown Prosecution Service's complex casework units demonstrate how legal innovation, specifically the bad character evidence provisions, can bring justice in cases previously impossible to prosecute. Lisa Gribbin, Joanne Roberts, and Vicky Atkins attend every day of the trial, carrying photographs of their murdered friend, maintaining a presence that reminds everyone why this case matters. They sit in the gallery as Claire's representatives, the young women who refused to let her memory fade, who campaigned for 2 decades to see this moment arrive. On December 11, 2014, after deliberating for just 3 hours, the jury returns its verdict, guilty of murder. The courtroom erupts in quiet sobs and relieved exhales. Claire's friends embrace, tears streaming down their faces. The prosecution team allows themselves brief smiles of satisfaction. Ash Smith shows no reaction, his face remaining impassive as it has throughout the trial. The next day, December 12, 2014, Mr. Justice Sweeney sentences Ash Smith to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 21 years before eligibility for parole. The judge notes this minimum term represents roughly what Ash Smith would have served if prosecuted successfully in 1993. Sweeney describes the murder as premeditated, explaining that Ash Smith selected Claire because she presented herself as a vulnerable victim in a location he knew well. Following the conviction, detectives publicly brand Ash Smith as pure evil, stating he should never be freed. Jaswant Narwal, CPS Southeast Chief Crown Prosecutor, calls the case one of the most complex cases her office has handled in recent years, acknowledging the unprecedented use of bad character evidence to secure conviction. In November 2015, Ash Smith launches an appeal against his conviction, arguing that Mr. Justice Sweeney wrongly allowed gravely prejudicial material to go before the jury. His legal team challenges the admission of bad character evidence, claiming it biased the jury beyond repair. 3 senior judges, Lord Justice Davis and 2 other Lords Justice of Appeal, hear the appeal and reject it decisively. The conviction stands. Colin Ash Smith, now in his 50s, remains imprisoned at HMP Durham, serving a life sentence that effectively guarantees he will die behind bars. At 46 when sentenced and required to serve a minimum 21 years, he would be 67 before even becoming eligible for parole, and authorities have made clear their intention to oppose any release. Claire's parents never witnessed this resolution. Linda Tiltman dies in 2008, 7 years before Ash Smith's conviction. Cliff Tiltman dies in 2012, 2 years before the trial. They spend their final years without closure, without justice, without answers. Their deaths add another layer of tragedy to Claire's story. A family destroyed by violence, denied peace even in their final days. But Claire's friends ensure her memory receives proper honor. The Justice for Claire campaign, having achieved its primary objective, winds down after the conviction. The website goes offline, its final archive recorded on July 5, 2014. The group's work stands as testament to the power of persistence, the importance of keeping victims' stories alive, the difference dedicated individuals can make in pursuing justice. The community memorializes Claire in multiple ways. In April 2016, Dartford Council approves renaming Fast Track Manor Way to Tiltman Avenue, ensuring Claire's name remains part of the landscape she called home. Stone Parish Council plants Claire roses at their centre, beautiful blooms representing a life cut short. In 2022, they open a new eco-centre in Cotton Lane, Stone, dedicated to Claire after consulting with her family and friends. The building hosts environmentally friendly and educational activities for young people, including scouting, pursuits that honour Claire's spirit of service and her dream of helping others. The case features in multiple documentaries that educate the public about cold case investigations and the criminal justice system. BBC 4's 3-part series, The Prosecutors, devotes significant time to showing how legal teams built the case against Ash Smith, providing unprecedented behind-the-scenes access to CPS operations. Crime Plus Investigations' Murder Town examines the impact Claire's death had on Dartford and Greenhithe, exploring how communities cope with such violence. The broader implications of the case extend beyond one conviction. The successful use of bad character evidence in Ash Smith's trial establishes precedent for future prosecutions, where defendants' patterns of behavior demonstrate propensity for specific crimes. Legal scholars study the case as an example of how evidence law evolution can overcome obstacles that previously prevented justice. Cold case investigators point to the Tiltman case when arguing for resources and funding. They show how persistence, new technology, legal innovation, and refusing to close files can bring resolution decades after crimes occur. They demonstrate that families deserve answers, that communities deserve safety, that justice delayed doesn't mean justice must be denied. Clare Tiltman never becomes a firefighter. She never grows older than 16. She never fulfills the potential that teachers, friends, and family saw in her bright smile and determined spirit. But through the dedication of investigators, prosecutors, and friends who became advocates, her death brings a dangerous predator to justice and prevents him from ever harming anyone again. 21 years separate Clare Tiltman's murder from Colin Ash Smith's conviction. 2 decades during which legal frameworks evolved, forensic technology advanced, and dedicated individuals refused to abandon hope. The case demonstrates that solving cold cases requires more than scientific innovation. It demands human persistence, legal creativity, and communities willing to keep victims' memories alive. Today, Colin Ash Smith remains behind bars at HMP Durham, his name synonymous with predatory violence and the importance of pattern evidence in criminal prosecutions. The bad character evidence that secured his conviction continues influencing how prosecutors approach cases involving defendants with histories of similar crimes. Legal scholars cite the Tiltman case when discussing the balance between protecting defendants' rights and allowing juries to understand crucial context about criminal behavior. The alleyway, where Claire died, no longer serves as merely a crime scene. It stands as a reminder that evil can strike anywhere, that no community exists beyond the reach of violence, but also that justice eventually prevails even when obstacles seem insurmountable. The hundreds of floral tributes that appeared in January 1993 have long since faded, but the memory they represented persists through memorials, renamed streets, and community spaces dedicated to honoring a girl who deserved so much more than she received. Stéphane Dubois' decision to come forward with information about Ash Smith's prison confession illustrates how justice sometimes emerges from unexpected sources. His testimony, though challenged and questioned, provided the crucial detail, the zebra crossing, that only Claire's killer could know. Without that confession, without the legal framework allowing bad character evidence, Colin Ash Smith might have walked free in 2013, his parole granted, his danger to society continuing. The dedication of Claire's friends, Lisa Gribbin, Joanne Roberts, Vicky Atkins, and others who formed the Justice for Claire campaign, shows how ordinary people can effect extraordinary change. They organized vigils, held fundraisers, kept media attention focused on an aging case, and ensured that pressure on authorities never completely dissipated. Their advocacy matters not just for Claire, but for every victim whose case grows cold, whose family despairs, whose story risks fading into forgotten files. If this story moved you, hit that subscribe button for more deep dives into cases that demand justice. Clare Tiltman's story reminds us why these cases matter, why we cannot allow time to erase the memories of victims, why we must support law enforcement's efforts to solve cold cases, why we should never underestimate the power of communities demanding answers. Drop a comment. What cold case do you think deserves more attention? And share this video so Claire's story reaches others who need to understand that justice, though sometimes delayed, remains possible. Claire would have turned 47 in 2024, perhaps fulfilling her dream of serving as a firefighter, perhaps saving lives instead of losing her own. We cannot restore what Colin Ash Smith took from her parents, from her friends, from the community that loved her, but we can remember her story, learn from the investigation that eventually brought her killer to justice, and commit ourselves to ensuring that every victim receives the same persistent pursuit of truth. Thank you for watching. And remember, justice may be delayed, but it should never be denied.